On the front of your order of worship, you've got a picture of a tomb. And something that says, Lazarus Part 1, which is going to give you a great sense of relief because we're not going to cover the whole story of Lazarus today. This is a very important part of the book of John. And as we come together, we come together to talk about Jesus. We come together to point each other to Jesus. We come together to give each other the proper perspective of Jesus. And so as we're looking at the book of John and trying to understand the author's original intent to his original audience and try to figure out how it applied to them so we can apply it to us, it's all talking to us about Jesus, making sure that we have the proper perspective of who Jesus is and what he's done for us. And in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 11, we have the death of Lazarus. Now, the first thing that you need to ask yourself in this is, why didn't we get this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? I assume you've asked yourself that question. Because if you didn't know, if you didn't have the book of John, you would not know about Lazarus dying and being raised from the dead. You wouldn't know about it. Matthew, Mark, Luke didn't put it in there. There are a couple instances of resurrections, of people being brought back to life that they did talk about. Right? Now, some of you guys are searching your memories now. Do you remember when Jesus came across the widow whose only son was being taken to burial? And he stops the little procession and brings the widow's son back to life. Remember that one? Okay, good. Why didn't they write about Lazarus? Why didn't Matthew, Mark, or Luke put this story in? This is a big story, right? I mean, it covers a lot of ink in the book of John. Why did Matthew and Mark and Luke leave this one out? Well, this has something to do with why John is writing this book. Why he said, oh, by the way, we need to talk about this story. The last time we saw Jesus, he was speaking in Jerusalem during the feast of the Hanukkah, rededication of the temple, right? And they tried to kill him. We saw that. It's kind of a recurring theme. They're picking up rocks all the time. And so then we saw that he went out to where he was baptized, that where John the Baptist had done his original preaching, and he stayed there, and it appeared that he didn't want to go back to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, read with me in chapter 11. It says here, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany. Bethany is only 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. All right. He was from the town of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. We had that story of Mary and Martha before. Remember that? Remember where Mary was listening to Jesus and Martha was busy and said, you know, have my sister help me. And he said, Martha, Martha, there's so many things. You remember that story, right? Yeah. Okay. It's not in this book. But John is assuming that they know that story. John knows that they have reference to those other Gospels. It says here, this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. Now, that doesn't happen until chapter 12. Okay? So John is referring to something that he's going to talk about in chapter 12, but he knows they already know that story. They know that story. Oh yeah. She's the one that wiped the very expensive perfume where, what's his name? Judas got really upset because it wasn't sold. Right? Okay. So he's assuming that they have knowledge of that. He says, so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. Well, not really the end. It got there, right? No, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. You know, when you're sick, you want everybody here that can help. And if you have a dear friend, you really want them there. And if they have to stay 2 more days someplace, oh man, okay, I understand, you're busy, you got something going. But Jesus intentionally stayed where he was. And it says here, then he said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back there? Made a big impression on the disciples. Not too many things get through to them this much. But this did. Remember, Jesus, last time you were there, they were going to throw rocks at you. They were going to stone you to death. You sure you want to go back? He said, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, but for he sees by this world's light. It is when we walk by night he stumbles, for he has no light. That's kind of a weird thing to say, isn't it? What do you do with that? I mean, hey, it's true. You know, it's not like they had street lights. Jesus has said before, I am the light of the world. Remember that 3 chapters ago? I am the light. He said, we must work while there's light. We must work while I'm here. There's some things Jesus says I got to do while it's still light, while I'm still here. Does he want to go back to 2 miles outside of Jerusalem? No, it appears not. He doesn't really want to go back, but Lazarus and the family needs him. More than that, we're going to find out that the disciples need him to do this. He says here, he said, after he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. Jesus knew that Lazarus had died. This is the same terminology he used for the little girl before, right? His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. These guys they're with it, right? It's true, though. I mean, we just had a little dog went through surgery, and they went through surgery. Guess what you want him to do? You want to be comfortable enough to sleep, because when you sleep, you heal. Right? If somebody has a flu, somebody's sick, what do you want them to do? Sleep, because then their body can fight off. All right, the disciples going, okay, well, let's let them nap. Let's just let them sleep. Why wake them up? He says, so then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Yet, for your sake, so that you may believe, I'm glad I was not there. But let us go to him. Jesus called a man back from death. That is an amazing story. It's also very confusing, though. It was very confusing for the early Christians. Because when they were talking about resurrection, when you talk about resurrection, who do you think about? Jesus, right? Well, do you think about the widow's son? Do you think about the official's daughter? Do you think about Lazarus? They were all raised from the dead, according to your Bible. Is that confusing? In the Greek world, they had myths about people coming back from the dead. They were some of the basis for the mystery cults. Right? Confusing. Maybe that's why Matthew, Mark, and Luke left this story out. It was confusing. Sometimes it's confusing. But, you know, in our culture, we're cool with it. We just like the story. When he says, Lazarus, come out. Can't wait to get to that part. We like that part where he says, Jesus wept. Man, that's amazing. We love that part. But we forget what John is doing with this story for his audience. And here's one of the things his audience needs to know. That his disciples, these guys that are following around all the time now, not just on Saturday to Saturday, like the beginning. They're following around all the time. They're staying out there where John baptized, and they're baptizing people. Right? These people have trouble with their faith.